Good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome to today's session, which is on closing the gap subcontractor management under NEC contracts. My name's Brad Cahill. I'm the Business Development Manager at Digital Beehive, and I'll be your host today. Before we begin, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. You'll notice that as you join, everyone's camera's been turned off and microphones have been muted, and they'll remain off for the duration of the session. The chat function at the top has been disabled, but if you have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A section at any time. We encourage you to ask questions as we go, and we'll address them during the Q&A segment towards the end of the session. So today I'm joined by a panel of specialists who bring decades of NEC experience. I'm joined by Glenn Hyde, NEC expert, trainer and director of GMH Planning. Neil Earnshaw, NEC expert, trainer and director of NEC Consult. And then Ian Hedley, who is the Northeast Regional Director at Sullivan's Europe, delivering consultancy services and bespoke NEC training, supporting clients, contractors and subcontractors. So the question that I want everyone to think about before we get into the content are, what are the biggest issues that you currently face in managing subcontractors and the ability from either side to follow the rules of the subcontract? So take a moment, have a think and type in the answers in the Q&A session. If you're a main contractor, what are the biggest challenges you face in managing subcontractors under NEC? And if you're a subcontractor, what challenges do you face working under NEC with your main contractors? This could be anything: communication, program issues, understanding the contracts, inconsistencies between what the client expects and what the subcontract expects. So yeah, pop your answers in the Q&A. We'll collect them as we go, and we'll return to them at the end of the session to see how many we've addressed and whether there's any areas that deserve a bit of a deeper discussion at the end. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Mr. Glenn Hyde, who will kick us off.
Excellent. Thanks, Brad. Good afternoon, everyone. So we're here reflecting on subcontractor management. So either as a subcontractor, how you might need to manage the contract, but importantly, as contractors, how we're going to manage the supply chain and engage with the supply chain. Because a vast majority of contractors do not have the ability to carry out the works themselves. Now, there is sometimes some packages of work that contractors could do themselves, but the vast majority of the work, they will get in specialist subcontractors to do that aspect of the particular work. So therefore, they're going to have a series of subcontract management packages to deal with during the life of the project. And it's then thinking about how we engage with that particular subcontractor. And I think it's really important that subcontractors realise that obviously they cannot do their job without subcontractors. They are their lifeblood, really, because without subcontractors, there is no job. So for that regard, they should be very interested in long-term and mutually beneficial relationships with their supply chain. So it's really important that we sort of harness that relationship and nurture that relationship. Contractors don't just want to get through subcontractor after subcontractor. It would be great if they could rely on certain subcontractors, keep coming back and doing the same work. Just like contractors want repeat work with clients, then that relationship with subcontractors should be very similar. So one thing to think about then is how we apply those contractual rules and processes with the supply chain, because it's equally important that we manage the contractual engagement rules with the subcontractor as the contractor recognises they need to do with the clients. So that's what we're going to think about. What subcontract relationship we're going to set up, what contract we're going to use, and how we're going to manage it with the supply chain. So we're going to start the session with a bit of a question. We're just going to do a show of hands. So we just want you to join in. There's no wrong answer really with this. I'm just interested how you would see that you might deal with this. So imagine you're a contractor and you're 9 months into a 12-month job. You're on option C with the client, and you have to have a share percentage of 50%. So you're a share percentage option C contract. And the question is, if you're 9 months into a 12-month job and you're just about to let your final subcontract package, which happens to be the final perimeter fencing to go around the site, and it's one of the last packages you're going to do, under what contractual arrangement would you personally choose to let this subcontract package, i.e. which contract and or which option? So you've got 4 options there. Now we're going to do a show of hands. I'll call out, do you think the answer is 1, 2, 3 or 4? As I say, you can't really be wrong. It's just what would you personally do, or what have you done in the past if you had this similar scenario. So the options are, you can, 1, use a bespoke form of subcontract. 2, you can use an engineering construction subcontract, option C. 3, you could do an engineering construction subcontract, either option A or B, so lump sum contract, or you're going to use an engineering construction short subcontract. So just give you 10 seconds thinking time, and we'll do a very quick straw poll. What do you reckon? So you're on option C, 3 months to the end of the job, final perimeter fencing package, that's what they're going to be doing. How would you let that subcontract package? Out of interest, just raise your hand if you would say you go number 1, bespoke form of subcontract. So either you have or you would go a bespoke form of subcontract to manage this subcontract package. So raise your hand if you would go number 1. We'll do this quite quickly. Okay, just a couple, it looks like. Okay, thank you. You can reset your hands. Raise your hand if you go option 2. You go back to back with an option C. So raise your hand if you go back to back with an option C. And we've got 9 votes. Okay, thank you. You can lower your hands again. So 9 votes for an option C. Now raise your hand if you go either A or B. So you go an engineer construction subcontract, but you go option A or B. So raise your hand for that. And we're into the 20s, 23, 24, 25. Okay, gives us a feel. Thank you. You can lower your hands. And now raise your hand if you go option 4, which was the engineer construction short subcontract. Raise your hand for option 4. Oh, quite liking this. So we got 10 votes there as well. So I reckon we got quite an educated audience, Neil, because I reckon the answer there I would give is either 3 or 4. I certainly wouldn't go bespoke for reasons that hopefully is going to come out from Ian and Neil in the session today. And I also don't think we need to do option C, which wasn't a majority vote by any means. At that stage, do we really need a fairly firm package to go under option C, where if they overrun, then we could be liable for sharing the overrun cost with the subcontractor? So what we're going to intimate is I think it's important we go back to back, but it's back to back with an NEC contract rather than the same option. And certainly we don't want to go just some form of a bespoke form of subcontract, because we want these NEC rules to be passed along the line with our supply chain. So a pretty good answer, I think, from the group there. I would say the answer is either 3 or 4, not absolutely definitive, but yeah, and the majority of you went either 3 or 4. We haven't got enough information to know if it is simple enough to go short contract, but yeah, I reckon 3 or 4 is a good answer. So what do you reckon, Neil? Pretty educated audience.
Yeah, I think so, Glenn. Certainly, most people share our views on that one. That certainly we would never recommend going bespoke. We'd always recommend some kind of back-to-back arrangement with an NEC form of subcontract. C, I think, is less favoured as a subcontract because you've got to look at the level of complexity for what appears to be relatively simple, straightforward work. And also bear in mind who's the receiver of the contract. You know, between client and main contract, you might have a really good understanding of option C, target cost contracts, but has the subcontractor got the systems in place and the skills to be able to manage one of those option C contracts as well? And you probably find they wouldn't, and that it'd be an awful lot of work for not a lot of added value, in my opinion. So yeah, I think we definitely all were on the same page there. Really, we want to be passing on the same or similar rights and obligations along the supply chain with the same sanctions and liabilities. And I always think by doing this, it helps us to actually manage our main contracts with our client teams. Because if you think of it from a simple point of view, if you're the main contractor, you've got an obligation in your contract to notify early warnings, to submit programs for acceptance, to manage compensation events, and all those kinds of good things. Then where does that information come from initially? And it would come from the supply chain. So, the fact that the supply chain have obligations to do early warnings, compensation events in line with the main contract procedures, and manage programs in line with those as well should be really beneficial. And what we have to remember with NEC, that fundamentally one of the overarching objectives of the whole suite was to stimulate the good management of contracts. So if we're going bespoke and just having a very traditional form of subcontract, we're going to miss all those benefits that we can get. It'll also help with entitlement to payment and compensation by passing on some of the obligations to be transparent and the obligation to proactively manage change progressively as work progresses. And also, it does make things easier in that the clause 26 in the contract is a bit easier on the contractor if they do choose to go with an NEC subcontract, because there's no obligation to submit contract documents, including the pricing information for acceptance when they do that. So there's an incentive, if you like, to contractors for going back to back in this way.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Neil. I think just to build on your recommendations or the collective recommendations to use an NEC contract for the works, whether that's a full form or one of the short options, I think it's worth highlighting a trend that we've seen in industry recently anyway, and have done for a number of years now across Tier 1 and Tier 2 contractors, whereby they often use purchase order terms and conditions as the basis of an appointment for a subcontractor. So quite often these can be sizable or even complex sort of subcontract packages, but they let on simple purchase order terms and conditions. So something that they probably used to buy some stationery or some PPE last week, they then rolling out a civil subcontract, for example, under the same terms and conditions. So from experience, I think this brings a whole host of risks. So it's almost the opposite of what you just described there in terms of the NEC philosophy and approach, but you've got a lack of comprehensive contract terms. So POs often omit key sort of terminology in terms of time, quality, variation, delays, dispute resolution. So most of the major risks that we deal with and contend with on a day-to-day are unaddressed. Equally, they often lack appropriate communication protocols or procedures, timescales in which to reply. There'll be no program or progress updates stipulated in there. So there's nothing about identifying risks. So the early warning mechanisms won't be inherent within a purchase order, terms and conditions. No requirement to hold meetings to discuss those and manage the process as well. And it won't define change or what is an admissible cost like the schedule cost components do. So again, just inappropriate. In terms of ambiguities in terms of scope of work. So again, what we find again is POs often don't even acknowledge or point you in a direction of what the scope of work documents are. So what is the baseline that you provide and what you're obliged to follow, and what would deem to be completion of that service. Inadequate risk allocation. So again, said before, responsibilities for delays, defects, insurances, safety, all of those type of things are unlikely to be clearly defined or perhaps even legally enforceable. Limited change management mechanics. So again, no formal mechanism for pricing or accepting change, compensation events, variations. So this often results in cost escalations or potential disputes further down the line. Limited legal protection as well. So again, POs may not meet the requirements of a formal subcontract, so it makes it harder to enforce any obligations or recover damages, for example, in terms of disputes or breach of contract situations. So I think while we rely on PO, I guess relying on PO for anything beyond sort of very low risk procurement, very low risk project stuff is why, as you've emphasised already, Neil, it's far better that you're protected by using an appropriate NEC form.
Sure. Yeah, great points, Ian. And another point that I see as well is that certainly in the UK, where our contracts are governed by the Housing Grants Construction and Regeneration Act, most standard purchase order terms and conditions that I see are non-compliant with the legislation. And so the scheme for construction contracts would be read in the event of a dispute anyway. So, you know, it just doesn't work very well, does it, using a PO? It's too simple a solution for what is quite a complex world and a risky world that we operate in.
Yeah, true.
Excellent. So, I guess how do we avoid some of these the pitfalls with subcontracts and the rest of the supply chain then? So if you think about when we're in the pre-contract stage, what can we do to improve the results we get from our supply chain? So one of the top tips we've got is that make it clear what your expectations are in terms of how you'll manage subcontracts. Don't just see it as some kind of commercial negotiation. You know, set your stall out as the contractor to say, no, we will be managing the contract and we will manage it properly to get benefits for both parties or better outcomes for both parties. So make sure we set our stall out to do that. And equally, if we are using NEC with our suppliers, surely it'd be a good idea to ask for some evidence to convince us that they do understand how to actually manage NEC contracts and the principles that they all enshrine as well. So asking them what their experience is, gauge a level of understanding, and then, if you do discover that they don't have that knowledge or understanding, encourage them to increase their own knowledge for the benefit of both parties, because it's no good for the contractor working with subcontractors who don't realise that they have to give early warnings, that don't realise they have to notify early warnings. It can be really risky for the contractor just as much as it can be for the subcontractor. Also, if we're going to manage the contract well, we need to get a program from subcontractors as well. And that can be used pre-contract to demonstrate not only that they understand what Clause 31 says in terms of the first program requirements, but also that they understand the full extent of the scope and any constraints and obligations that exist there as well. So there's quite a few things we can do pre-contract to make sure we set the contract up well at the start and increase the chances of it being successful afterwards. But all too often that work doesn't get done. It's just seen as a commercial negotiation. There you go, we've signed the contract, off you go. But there's a lot more we could do to improve things for everybody.
Yeah, just before we move on then, Neil, as well, from my experience, I guess we're great at facilitating project startup meetings or workshops between the main contractor and the client. But we don't seem to do it very well with subcontractors. Why do we think that is the case? Do you think there's a particular reason for that, or?
I just think it's maybe naive of people to think that you can just drop people onto these contracts and expect them to know how to manage them. I mean, Glenn and I have been doing NEC training for a couple of decades now, I guess. And, if you go back 10 years or more, we did very little work with the supply chain. It was always between client and contractor. Over the more recent years, I have seen an increase in subcontractors trying to upskill themselves to get their increase their understanding of how the contracts operate. But I just think there's quite a naive expectation that because the contractors understand NEC to some extent, that they just automatically assume that the supply chain would just take a naive approach, saying, well, they've signed up to it, they know they've got to do it. What's the problem? But as you rightly say, the benefits we can get from doing the startup workshops with the client team and the contractor are equally the same benefits you would get from doing similar work with the supply chain.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ian. It's I see the same thing as Neil. I think we're just behind the curve. So even our training and between the client and the contractor, that probably 15 years ago, even that wasn't happening so much, but then it started to happen a lot more. So that's kind of more the norm. So I just think understanding and recognizing the same thing needs to be done between the contractor and the subcontractor. Yeah, it's just 5, 6, 7, 8 years behind the curve, and we're now there. And we're at that point where everyone's recognizing that, yeah, this needs to be managed at this level as well. And yeah, why haven't we done it before? Well, let's not beat ourselves up while we haven't, but let's make it happen going forward.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I think if we want true collaboration, I think we need to encourage people to follow the contract. We've chosen the contract for a reason. It's a project management toolkit. If you're not going to use it, you're going to put it in a drawer. It sort of loses the benefit, doesn't it? I guess in that sense. But
absolutely, yeah.
I think on some of the more recent stuff that we've done, we've worked with clients in particular and contractors as well, but collating framework conditions. So we've actually, when we've been tendering or assisting in the tendering process, we've actually asked for that evidence that you mentioned earlier in the prior slide, Neil, about what experience have they got, which personnel are going to be used on it, have you got any example CE quotations, which obviously will be redacted in terms of the content, but how do we ensure that their systems and processes and governance processes are aligned to the procedures in the contract? Are we going to get any confidence from that? And then we've also introduced sort of the kickoff collaboration aspect, where we've also linked stuff to KPIs. So programs would be a typical one, wouldn't it, where you struggle to get an accepted program. So we've introduced KPIs into the agreement where we incentivize the right behaviours. We incentivize the people to attend meetings regularly. So these were fortnightly meetings from memory to try and sit down. There's no surprises. You update the programme as a collective, as a project team, because it's for the project's benefit, not the subcontractors or the contractors. And then you should just submit it and be in a position to actually accept. So you've got a regular flow of accepted programs, because that's one of the key sort of issues that we encounter with using NEC anyway, is the regular acceptance of a program, or the misunderstanding that accepting programs with compensation events in which haven't been assessed and implemented may mean that you're accepting the quantum or the period that's in the program, which isn't quite the case. But yeah, just that encouragement, I guess, needs a little bit more thought, doesn't it, about how we can do that. So
yeah, definitely, yeah. Do you and Glenn see the same thing as me, Ian? That there's kind of a collective hand-wringing exercise from a lot of tier 1 and tier 2 contractors who are going, well, we've got ourselves up to speed, we understand it, but they haven't got a clue, they don't know what to do, and it's like that. When everybody sits looking at each other going, somebody should do something about this, but nobody does anything.
Yeah.
And I do think key clients, some clients, I think they have taken the lead in some regard in terms of how they approach their tier 1s and tier 2s to stimulate good practice, as you say, through the use of KPIs and other stimulants in the contract to encourage good practice along the supply chain, to make sure that all those benefits that they have, are seen elsewhere as well.
Yeah, I see a lot of clients introducing fair payment to the supply chain, which is a good initiative. So putting rules on contractors that they can't increase the length of time they're going to pay them. They can't add retention when they've not got retention themselves. So, and yeah, like Ian said, KPIs initiatives. So yeah, seeing some, I think we could do more. And I guess we'll look at some of those in the session today.
Yeah. Good stuff. Okay, so yeah, moving on then. So I guess taking it further still, even before we encounter that tender stage and we asking for submissions, and I think my plea would be, please do this before and not after you've tendered the works. So provide more time for your team to actually collate the proposed subcontract conditions. So don't send it out in the back of a fag packet and expect a submission and not the change later down the line when they understand further the risk profile, what main options are in there, what secondary options are in there, what additional options or conditions are included as well. So do it at the outset and provide them that at the time, because I don't understand how you can price a contract if you don't know what terms you're going to be using as well. But yeah, I'd say a well-defined subcontract scope, and not just the scope, but the actual contract documentation in itself will help both parties understand their obligations, interfaces, and deliverables better. Don't just pass down the main contract scope or terms and conditions. So it needs to be tailored specific to that individual or to that organisation. No good sending a whole scope to the fencing organisation because you're fearful of missing something out. And they've got to tread through hundreds of pages of documentation to identify what relates to their scope. Common issues when contractors pass down sort of from the main contract just introduces ambiguity, unclear responsibilities. It's subcontractors can inadvertently become responsible for activities outside of their intended remit or scope. It'll lead to more disputes around what was included in the scope, what wasn't, additional costs, escalations. I think inappropriate risk allocation as well. So I think a lot of main contractors have a habit of transferring risk by placing subcontractors on fixed price NEC conditions. So option A, for example, when their main contract might be under an option C. That's not wrong in its truest sense. However, when the design maturity is low, how can they expect the subcontractor to price appropriately or absorb that risk if they don't have sufficient maturity of design to inform the fixed price? So all it's going to do is result in inflated tenders or claims later in the project. I guess flow down of unsuitable terms as well, should I say. Stuff like we see delay damages being incorporated, so it would just be a flow down from the main contract without any thought or clarity around, well, how does this subcontract impact that, or can they actually accommodate that as well? Stuff like limitations of liability, again, flow down without any thought. Insurance levels, not appropriate for the subcontractor entity or the works that they're delivering or the services. Indemnities are usually passed down, which are inappropriate as well. So again, I guess what I'm trying to say is it needs to be proportionate to the scale, value, or the complexity of the works that you're trying to sublet as well. You need their help. So try and help them as well to get on favourable terms. And I guess the biggest bugbear for me, and no doubt Neil, Glenn, you'll have experienced this as well, subcontract terms and conditions, absolutely fine, but then you get a whole raft of Z clauses or additional clauses, which then reference back to the main contract conditions being incorporated into the agreement. It's like, what is the point in doing that? I don't understand it. I don't think that as a subcontractor, you should be willingly enter into an agreement that does that as well. Especially if there's a lack of order of precedence in there as well. That again doesn't help in terms of ambiguities. So I guess one example I can give last week, there was a option A subcontract. I'll not say the client or such, but in the additional conditions of contract, the contractor was adamant that they had to be applied. They couldn't be amended. They couldn't be omitted. It was an option A subcontract, but within there it had a Z clause that gave right to the contractor to audit the full suite of accounts from the subcontractor. So akin to a schedule of cost components, disallow costs sort of attitude. If they weren't incurred, they could then therefore reduce the activity values accordingly. So you think you've signed up to an option A, but actually you've signed up to an option E in reality. Which again, just a bit strange. So I think my sort of plea would be, think about it when you're drafting a subcontract document, make it appropriate, tailor it appropriately. If you're going to make additional conditions or introduce Z clauses, then perhaps you need to think about how they sort of align with other conditions or the existing conditions. And I think as well, good practice would be create some sort of guidance notes to go with that, so it's clear to everybody and both parties as to what the intent of the amendment is and what it's supposed to do. So then it's open and can facilitate discussions.
Yeah, it's a real bugbear, isn't it? And I mean that. Oh, by the way, can you comply with everything in the main contract as well? You go to the trouble to set up a separate subcontract, and then saying, by the way, you've got to comply with everything in the main contract, which you can come and read at our head office if you want to. So don't even give a copy.
No.
I've got a plan next year. I don't know how, but we're gonna do a plan within our NEC people group to try and stamp this out. I can only think of getting main contractors to sign up to a charter where they're going to agree to sign up to it, and at the very least we can publish the charter to say, look, these are the contractors who agree not to do that. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes next year. Okay, well, Section 26 is where we are having to put forward who we're proposing to subcontract to. And not all contractors realise they've got to do this, but you need to put forward to the project manager for acceptance the names of each proposed subcontractor that you're planning to use. And subcontractor is a defined term. So labour-only suppliers is not a subcontractor, but anyone who is providing works or design is what we call a subcontractor. So they do have to be issued for acceptance. And the only reason in the contract that would mean that the subcontractor cannot be accepted is they would not allow the contractor to provide the works in accordance with the scope. In reality, that's only really going to be financial stability concerns, quality concerns, safety concerns, things like that. And it would have to be a pretty good reason, because the client wouldn't want to disrupt the contractor to deliver the works. But if there's a reason that there's a particular subcontractor that's caused problems on another job, or financial issues, then, or stability concerns or quality concerns, then they are within their rights to say no, they don't want that subcontractor. And the point is that they shouldn't be appointed until they are accepted. Never mind have them on site. So they shouldn't be appointed until the project manager has accepted them. And not only that, the terms and conditions also need to be issued for acceptance as well. So it's not only the name of the subcontractor, but the terms and conditions need to be issued for acceptance. Maybe that's how the clients can help stamp out where the contractor's putting in, and you've also got to comply with the main contract. 'Cause if the client spots that, maybe they can be the ones to say, no, you shouldn't be doing that. So maybe that's where we can maybe leverage that. So in terms of issues with subcontractor acceptance, well, the plain fact is that often it's just not done. Now, to be honest, there is limited risk if you don't do it. to a contractor, and sometimes contractors tell me, well, we've never done that, but the client's never pulled us and project managers never stopped us, and we've done the whole job without having anyone accepted. Okay, that might have happened, but it doesn't mean you'll get away with that on the next job. And if they stop you working at any point because they've not accepted them, then that will be your liability. And God forbid if there's an accident with a subcontractor that's not even been accepted, well, then as well as obviously there's been an accident, which is terrible, the ramifications of that could be absolutely massive. There is the potential reason for termination if an appointed a subcontractor before the project manager accepted them. So it could be that strong, unlikely, but there is the potential for that. So therefore, we want to make sure that you do put forward not only the name, but also the terms and conditions for acceptance to avoid any such delays. And also ensure subcontractor procurement and the acceptance, you could show them on the program to make sure that you as a contractor don't miss them. And it's another check and balance. So if they're on the program to do, then it's more likely, hopefully, that they will indeed get done. Looking at the Digital Beehive system, because obviously there's various cloud-based systems, but if you were using Digital Beehive, for example, then you would do it on the system. So here we're just showing a screenshot showing that, yep, you're going to click on the subcontractor submission tab. So you click on that, and then you've got the form that comes up that then you can then submit who you're submitting. I see GMH has been promoted to plumbing rather than planning. I didn't notice that one on the dry run through. So yeah, GMH plumbing, excellent. All your plumbing skills needed there. So this plumbing outfit is being issued for acceptance, and you can see there's a separate tab for the terms and conditions as well to be accepted. And then the response would be done then on the cloud-based system. So the project manager now knows they need to accept someone, and then they're going to decide if they're going to accept or not accept the name of the subcontractor. And then also separately on the system will be accepting or not accepting the subcontract terms. So just tying it together, obviously, the cloud-based system will help manage the flow. And this is one of those things it will help manage. So issuing for acceptance, subcontractor and subcontract terms can then be managed within the system. So that's got its own place, not done on a general communication form or anything. It's done on a separate issue for acceptance. Neil, what about specifically if we are on a cost reimbursable contract? Any extra things we need to worry about there?
Yeah, for sure. And again, this is something I've seen an increasing trend in over the last few years, is that when the main contractor is under option C with the client, then the project manager and their team should be carrying out audits and inspections of the defined cost to validate it, just to give the client assurance that what's being paid is in accordance with the contract. And if you look at the definition of defined cost, the first element of that is paying subcontractors, or they shouldn't have been paid to a subcontractor or supplier in accordance with its contract. So if you aren't managing your subcontractors well, the risk for the main contractor is that the client team are going to disallow costs from you for straying outside the rules that you agreed to up front. And I've seen that happen on a number of occasions over recent years, where client teams are now starting to scrutinize defined cost in a lot more detail and wanting to see all the subcontract communications and all the information from subcontractors to then check, are you actually doing this right yourselves? And I think if you think about it, if you've got a decent sized subcontract package of say £1 million, if you have 25,000 of that disallowed, that's equivalent to 2.5%, which is pretty much the profit you'd expect to earn. So, you've got to do a £1 million worth of turnover to generate £25,000 worth of profit if you sort of estimate that contractors on roughly 2.5% margins. So disallowed costs can really hit you in the pocket as a main contractor, and you don't want to be giving the client teams any reason to be disallowing costs under that particular element of disallowed cost. So yeah, managing subcontractors well, making sure we have robust systems in place for managing them, and that we've got competency in both teams to manage them well, then that will mitigate against that risk.
Yeah, so again, taking on Neil's point further, I guess that can be applied to all options as well, can't it? But ineffective administration can cause problems across all of the main sort of payment options. So miscommunication. So again, just some examples from sort of recent experiences. So verbal instructions, no such thing, but people do follow them for some reason. Protracted email exchanges, it's not very clear as to who has instructed it and if it forms part of your scope or not. It's often embedded within an email chain somewhere, and it's not clear as to has an instruction been made or not. Various versions of the truth. So in particular values of CE, so compensation events, if they're not implement or accepted and implemented or assessed and implemented formally, and a record of that shown, there's no it causes ambiguity, and I think there's a temptation for contractors, not all, but some contractors, to get towards the end, and we talked about margin erosion there, Neil, but is to then look back at history and go, benefit hindsight, actually didn't take you 10 days to do that. Maybe we should have a look at that again, and we'll reassess that at 5 days because we think it only took 5, and it's just not clear as to what has been accepted, what's been implemented. The 4-step sort of process for CEs hasn't been followed in full, and therefore it leaves a little bit of window of opportunity, I guess, to exploit that. Lack of clarity in version controls. Again, scope's not often updated. I don't think this is an NEC specific issue, to be honest. But if we get changes to scope, the actual scope document isn't ordinarily updated, is it? It's not amended to replace what was originally intended and what is now intended. You usually have to compare and contrast the two, and there's again needs a bit of an audit trail there. So if there's no version control, there's no history, there's no transparency, again it can cause issues. Compliance issues, so this is more NEC related, but often I see stuff like issue of TQs, RFIs, NCRs. What are they? NEC doesn't recognise that terminology. So NCRs will be usually attributable to defects, but again, not necessarily an NEC term. You're not following the contract procedures. Worst of all, I think for me though, in terms of the compliance issue, is using or not updating the compensation event register, not updating the records to demonstrate what the value of the accepted or implemented CEs are. That then doesn't feed through to the finance team or the procurement team within the contracting organisation. You then go and do an assessment of the application each month from the subcontractor, and the sanction levels haven't been increased internally. So you end up being in breach of contract because you're not paying them on time. Again, to going back to your point again about POs, Neil, about the compliance with the Housing Grants and Construction Act, and having the regular sort of payments, the interim payments, all the way through the life cycle of the contract. But if you're doing that as well, and you are implementing CEs and you are assessing it, I think having one version of the truth helps everybody, because that person within finance or procurement, whoever's responsible, could have just had a glance at a system or a register that shows that is the value now, it's what's being implemented. I need to raise the sanction levels. Shouldn't be waiting on somebody to actually send an email across to them afterwards to do so, and then it said you're in breach of contract for late payment. And obviously cash flow is king as well in terms of supply chain and particular subcontracts. Similarly, performance and commercial monitoring difficulties. Again, there's not one version of the truth. If you've got ineffective administration or too many people involved in it. So I think the benefits, I guess, of going to a digital or an online platform are for all to see, because all of that stuff there in terms of the ineffective administration could lead to disputes, protracted negotiations. Final account, which is supposed to be rolling now, isn't it, under NEC, won't be a rolling final account, and you'll be hit with stuff later down the line. So yeah, that's my sort of take on the ineffective administration from experience anyway.
Yeah, great point, Ian. And then to summarise, really what I heard you saying on a repeat basis on that last slide was, it puts me in mind of a sort of quite a well-renowned quote in construction. There was a world-renowned construction lawyer called Max Abrahamson who said, all too late, parties to a construction contract often realise that the 3 most important things on any contract are records, records, and records. You can't argue with the truth. You can't argue with the facts. If you've got a photograph, it's proof, it's evidence. You know, if you've got signed day worksheets, you know, it's proof, it's evidence that the work was done and that at that point in time, you know, people were happy with it. So good record keeping, robust contract administration, keep you as a subcontractor and a main contractor out of trouble.
Yeah, completely agree.
Okay, so another sort of question for discussion, I guess, really. Do we think that management of the contract is generally better between the client and the contractor than it is between the contractor and subcontractor? So again, shall we do a raise hands? Who think it's better between client and contractor than it is between contractor and subcontractor? Let's see. Okay, don't be shy. So far, we've got some good responses there. Those of you who think, because there's about a third of you are probably saying, yeah, I think it's better. Those of you who don't think it's better, post in the Q&A why you think that might be the case. Okay, are you really good at managing your supply chain, for example? Okay, interesting. So how can we ensure that we do manage our contracts well? So have we thought about using some kind of formal contract management system in order to improve how we actually manage our contracts? I mean, why do we think contractors wouldn't want to do that with their supply chain? Again, it's quite normal these days that people are using a contract management system between the contractor and the client team, but it's not that common to see that being used in the supply chain. But what are the blockers there? Why are people not willing to do it? Is it fears about the cost of the systems and that being a burden on the contractor? Could it be a fear of exposing how we're not managing contracts well? Or could it be thinking that they can use a lack of subcontractor managing the contract to their own advantage? So you take advantage of the fact that they haven't done it properly. I was with a tier 1 contract doing some training last week actually, and I was talking to the commercial manager there, and he was really interested in having oversight in terms of how his team were managing subcontractors, because what he was finding was that he was finding out about problems too late. That the team was sort of saying, yeah, everything's fine, but then the problems had come across his desk when it was kind of a long way down the line, when parties had started to fall out and had started to have sort of entrenched opinions on who was right and who was wrong in the situation. So maybe using some kind of system would help us, a formal system would help us with that, to help us have the oversight to be able to spot problems earlier before they manifest, so we can hopefully mitigate and avoid them.
Definitely. So, I mean, we could do this if we had a bit more time. We could do this as a live question, but almost leave it as a rhetorical question. So who uses a cloud-based system with the client as a contractor, and who then typically uses a cloud-based system with subcontractors? Well, we did a state of the industry survey last year, quite a big survey. The results are on our website. There's quite interesting elements came out of that. And one of the questions we asked was that question. So what proportion are you using between the client and the contractor, and then what proportion the contractor and the subcontractor? So this is quite a big survey we did, so pretty confident that the answers are relative to what was actually out there. So you could see on the left, between the client and the contractor, 72% were using a cloud-based system, which still means that 28% aren't, which is still quite a big number. But then when we switch to the right-hand side, contractor, subcontractor, then it flipped, and only 33% were using it with the cloud-based system. So going back to Neil's questions there, why is it? Is it cost? Is it exposing your own lack of administration with a sub you don't want, or thinking you can play on that? What is it? But I think most would realize, or are starting to increase and realize that actually no, and that pie chart is now getting bigger. I suspect that number's gone up already from last year, and hopefully that will continue to improve, because it is important that the subcontractors are demonstrating their knowledge and auditing their administration on a similar cloud-based system. So this happens to be a project where there's one portal between the client and the contractor, but you can see here that the contractor has set up separate portals. So we've got 16 subcontract packages here, and each portal is an individual subcontract on that package. So you can then dive into each of those packages and see instantly where we are in terms of, has there been an accepted program? How many compensation events are outstanding yet to be agreed? So if we are managing each subcontract package on one of these portals, and as I say, you could click on one of these and then dive into it, it then means we're helping manage that flow of communications between the parties. Because why wouldn't we want to do that? And it will mean that we can then just manage that flow of communications so much better. And I would say in this day and age, another thing people are realizing is sometimes as a contractor, you don't have any choice on the headline system that the client has chosen. And whilst they do a similar job, there are some that are better than others. And it's for you to do your homework and interrogate which cloud-based system do you think works for you. Because if you use the same system with your supply chain, other than familiarity, that's really the only benefit in using the same system, because you can't draw information from one to the other. So it's a standalone system. So I would emphasize that as a contractor, you should do your homework and trial a couple of these systems and see which one you think works for you in terms of functionality, compatibility, in terms of contractual compliance, and price will come into it as well. So that's the seed. Don't think you're stuck with the same cloud-based system that you got with a client. You have the potential to use a different one if you think one of them is better, and it's obviously for you to decide which one you think is the better one for all those reasons. Now, what about program? Again, with the subcontractors, and again, I'm guessing the cloud-based system will help that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because the systems help to regulate the procedure, so they should stimulate it, but also, as you rightly say, you get the performance data to see, well, when was the last time we had one, and then investigate why it has been a long time if you haven't had one submitted for some time. So yeah, I mean, it is really good practice to have one submitted pre-contract, and then from a subcontractor's point of view, you know, there's a sanction in the subcontract where the contractor would withhold a quarter of the price for work done to date for non-submission of the first program. But if the program is in the contract and reference to a contract data part 2, that sanction isn't available. Now, this works. I always see this as working two ways for parties, in that, yeah, we should aim to include it in the contract because, as we said earlier, we can use that to test their understanding of the program requirements. We can use it to test the subcontractor's understanding of the scope. But there's a caveat, which is only include it if it's any good. So if it does comply with clause 31.2 requirements, so if it shows the information the contract requires, and if it does cover all of the scope, then let's get it included. But what I've observed over the years is people reporting to me how, when they include a program in the contract that isn't any good, it becomes more challenging post-contract to improve the quality of it, because people will say things like, well, you've set a precedent now. It was good enough at tender stage. I don't understand why it's not good enough now. So that's always a good idea to get the program in the contract. If it's not of sufficient quality, or if it's out of date at the point you're entering into contract, then sure, get it submitted by the subcontractors post-contract. Also, you do need to keep an eye on what goes on with subcontract acceptance, and the systems help us do that. I think, you know, to get one program not accepted once is bad enough. When that happens twice, we've got an increasing problem. When it happens a third time, remember, you're going now 3 months without an accepted program, you've got a big problem brewing. And everything just gets harder when it comes to having predictable forecasts of when work is going to be complete. It's difficult to coordinate works with different subcontractors and the client team and the main contractor, and it makes the assessment of compensation events even harder than it already is. So, you know, we should be keeping an eye on acceptance, and then when we see that there's a problem, rather than just saying, well, it's their fault, they've not done it right, or whatever, that we should investigate it to try and look at the root cause of it. You know, and in particular, when that happens on a repeat basis, it's showing there's an underlying problem that needs to be resolved. Okay. So yeah, education and encouragement is absolutely key. I mean, how many people do this with their subcontractors? You know, when I was a contractor's QS, I used to work with my subcontractors. You know, I was taught to pay people fairly for the work they'd done, and I wouldn't try and take advantage of them because they didn't have as good an understanding of the contract as me. I would try and educate them. I'd try and mentor them a bit. I mean, I know there are some limits here as to how far you would go, that there is a point where you encourage them to go and get some training to improve their own understanding. But, you know, I won't try and take advantage of simple, you know, technical reasons for, you know, being able to reduce the value of compensation events, not awarding all the time that they're due, not paying them correctly, looking for spurious reasons to say, well, the work isn't complete, I'm not paying for it, and those kinds of things. So contractors should realize how much it's in their interest to have an informed supply chain. And if all contractors took the same approach, whilst you might not be working with that subcontractor again, you know, maybe ever again, or maybe in the direct future, what we can do is raise the competency and understanding across the industry, which would really deliver benefits for all of our projects. As Ian brought up earlier, you know, startup workshops are a really good idea to make sure we get things off on the right foot, to make sure that we have that common understanding of how the key procedures will be applied on a particular contract with a particular team, you know. So that's a really good idea, to get everybody in the room rather than just oh, do you understand it? Yeah, we understand it. Let's get on with it then. To actually get people together in a room, because, you know, one of the key things people talk about with NEC contracts is collaboration, isn't it? And that doesn't just happen by accident. You can't just bang a table and shout and demand collaboration. It takes effort. And I always say to people, it's quite simple. It's just about everything you say and everything you do. That's what collaboration is. Okay. So yeah, and we should be encouraging subcontractors to follow the procedures. You know, I don't think it takes long to speak to a subcontractor to say, look, you've not sent any early warnings. I know there are things that you should have done it for. This is what it's for. This is the benefit of it. This is how you do it. You know, would take a very short amount of time. And I know from speaking to tier 1 contractors that I do training with, you know, many people do that. They spend a bit of time with them when they see issues of non-compliance. They spend a bit of time educating, informing, encouraging. Okay, because I think once you've encouraged them to do it, because an early warning notice or a compensation notice, it sounds very formal, and a lot of people don't like doing that because historically they've been told not to be contractual. So encouraging them, look, it's fine. We won't take offence at this. We want to know and we want to manage things well. These are the procedures that we're doing it. Spending a bit of time explaining them would hopefully encourage better compliance, and the issues that we inevitably will have on any contract will get resolved in a more timely manner. And yeah, I do think, you know, and I always say this, I say it to clients, that it's up to you to take the lead. You set your stall out at the start for what your expectations are, and then make sure your contractors deliver on it. It's exactly the same with contractors and subcontractors. You know, lead by example, manage them well, treat them fairly. Okay. And hopefully you'll get a better outcome from them. What do you think, Glenn?
Yeah, I'd pick up that baton as an absolutely fundamental thing. So yeah, a key message, I always say, treat subcontractors as you'd want to be treated by the client. So just finishing on that theme. So things like, don't expect subcontractors to act on verbal instructions. So we spend ages in training telling you that you don't have to follow verbal instructions from clients as contractors, and yet you maybe do that exact same thing to your supply chain. Respond to submissions well within the contractual timescales. So again, if you're seen to be following the contractual timescales, then you'll stimulate other people around you to want to do the same thing. Work collaboratively to agree the effects of change in a timely manner. So again, compensation events, keep on top of those, work through the compensation event process and make sure you're working through that. And just because you're not getting agreement with the client, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be agreeing things with your subcontractors. Just because your client is saying, we don't think you're entitled to that, if you've put a quote through, you're adamant you are entitled to it, you shouldn't be saying to your subbies, no, you're only going to get it if we get it. Because if you're entitled to it, well, you might have to go through a dispute process to get it. But that shouldn't mean you say to the subcontractor, no, we're not paying you because we haven't got it. And if we eventually get through dispute process, then we'll pay you. I do get that's quite a brave step, obviously, to say, no, we are going to pay you because you're entitled to it, and we will make sure we get that. So the reluctance on the contractor is, well, we can't do it until, you know, we've got that agreement with the client. That's not what the contract says. So just because you've got a client not managing you properly as a contractor, that doesn't mean you then need to pass that down to the subcontractors. So really important message. So Brad, how do you sum all that up and lead us into Q&A?
Yeah, well, I don't think we've not got any questions posted in the Q&A session at the moment. There's been a couple of answers to that very first question. One of them, Mark Dawson with programs, which Neil covered. Then we had one from Stuart Graham, failure to follow early warning procedures and specifically notification periods. Late by subcontractor, then comprising notification to employer, and then Kevin has kindly answered that for us, actually. With many people view early warnings as a bad thing, educating people to get people into the mindset that they're a positive thing. So I think my question that I wanted to ask probably Ian, do you see that in your experience? Are people seeing early warnings as a bad thing rather than a proactive sort of collaborative way of managing risk and mitigating those risks?
Unfortunately, yes. Not in every circumstance. Some clients and some contractors are actually really good at it, and they treat it as it's supposed to be, i.e. a risk identification and management tool for the benefit of the project. So let's have a chat, let's have a discussion, let's try and sort out some mitigation measures, or consider doing something differently, or how can we help? Others just say, stop bombarding me with notices, which again, they've chosen. It baffles me at times because the client has chosen that particular form of contract, but then doesn't want to use it, which is the first clause, isn't it? Follow the contract, follow the rules. So yeah, unfortunately, it's a mixed bag. I think that using a digital system and the workflows in there, I think some subcontractors in particular maybe have insufficient resources to be able to administer the agreement in full and as they should be doing it. But I think using a workflow process as is inherent in a digital platform would help that compliance piece as well. But yeah, early warnings, mixed bag, unfortunately. I'm sure with Neil and Glenn will echo that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is a complete mystery to me why people resist them and just want to ignore them or deny their existence. So it's fundamentally managing risk proactively, which is what the contract's all about.
Yeah,
it's just I just don't get it.
I think we're getting better. So yeah, it's certainly improved since 10 years ago. But yeah, we still got that message to get across. But there's definitely improvements on that for sure. But maybe with the supply chain again, it's just a little bit lagging behind in how well we're managing that. We've got better, I think, generally with contractors and clients understanding that. So we just got to bring that contractor-subcontractor relationship along that road, and we're going to try and speed up to get there quicker.
I think as well, just touching on that, I think there's a training piece here as well, isn't there, between what are the differences between an early warning and a CE. So you don't necessarily have to raise an early warning for everything. If it's happened, you go through a compensation event. It's happened, isn't it? It's not an early warning anymore. So you don't necessarily need to raise an early warning and a compensation event. And I think there's probably, as I said, a little bit of an educational piece in that as well.
Yeah. I think that is one of the keys. Is you've got to have the right tools for the job. We understand this from an operational point of view, but why don't we understand it from a contract management point of view sometimes, that you can't just sign up to anything and just assume it's going to work out okay for you. It could be commercial suicide for your business. I had a subcontractor specialist last year on a contract, and I had a meeting with them, and I said, "Oh, send me the contract over." So they sent me a PDF document, and then I got my trusty contract out, and they said, "What's that?" I said, what's the contract? I mean, no, we sent you it. We sent you the PDF. Oh, yeah, but that also includes all of these words in here. You know, simple things like that, just knowing the basics, you know? So, yeah, a lot more work to do, but we can keep pushing on, can't we? We can keep trying to convert people to to good practice, to promote that, and hopefully people will take away a lot of top tips from this session to be able to actually go and apply this in practice.
Yeah, hopefully. Brad, I see Jane PT in the chat has put about my firm uses a contract management tool, but it requires a lot of effort to get subcontractors in some cases to use it. And again, it's just about education and it's about expectation. If we say from the outset, this is how we're going to do it. But to be honest, when people actually take the time to look at one of these systems, it's just so much easier to do it in a system because all your forms are there, all the timescales are there. Whereas if you're going to do it manually, if you think, no, we can't get them to use a system, well, what chance have you got them putting in a notification on the right piece of paper using the right language? That's going to be even harder and even more of a nightmare. So I think it is just about education. And also tell them, if you don't put your application on the system, we've got no way of paying you. That normally wakens them up to, oh, I better learn how to make the system work.
Yeah, and it goes back onto Neil's piece about education and encouragement as well. So I think we've probably all got a bit of a responsibility to support and encourage so that the contractor, but also your contract management provider, sit down with the project teams and do proper onboarding, proper training, make people feel comfortable using the system and work together.
Indeed. Well, time's flown, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we're out of time. So what we'll do is we'll send a recording of the session to all of the attendees, and we'll also make sure that you've got the contact details of all the speakers. So if you've got any follow-up questions or you need any advice or support, we can do that after the session. So yeah, finally, thank you all for coming, and thank you to our speakers, to Glenn, to Neil, to Ian, for taking the time to deliver the session. And we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.